Okay, hi everybody. My name is Lauren Cusick, and this training session is going to go over lockout tagout awareness for employees at Hollingsworth Logistics. I work as a safety and health consultant for the insurance agency that Hollingsworth works with. This training video, like I said, it's going to act as a general awareness training for lockout and tagout. The intent of this training is to provide information on the lockout tagout practices and the significance of lockout tagout devices. Now, it is really important that all employees at Hollingsworth have some type of insight about lockout and tagout. The purpose of this training is to really hit on all other employees at Hollingsworth who are not the affected or authorized employees. Now, if those terms don't really make sense to you, we'll dive deeper into those in a bit here. But the employees that are not going to be locking out or tagging out devices, but it's also critical that all employees are familiar with these specific terms and procedures that go along with it, which is why we wanted to put this training together for you all. In the long run, the more information that's provided, the safer the working environment for all. Now for some learning objectives. Many jobs require the use of machinery, and machinery sometimes needs to be maintenance performed on it as part of like a regular routine, or sometimes emergency repairs in case of a breakdown. This is when lockout tagout procedures need to be used. Before any work can be done on equipment, you need to be certain that the operation cannot suddenly release energy that will make it start up unexpectedly. It's really important that employees at Hollingsworth have some insight about lockout tagout, and the purpose of this course is for attendees to learn about the programs and practices, and also some commonly used terminology. So we will go over when a lockout tagout procedure is required, what sources of hazardous energy are, and critical components of a lockout tagout program. I want to start off with a video, so I'm hoping this works for you guys. It's about 2 minutes long, so just take a minute to listen.
This is the McCarty bottling plant in Jacksonville, Florida. It's August 16, 2012 at 4:30 p.m. What you're seeing here is a palletizer, a machine that packs and stacks cases of rum onto a pallet. The man you see here operates the palletizer. He's been cleaning the machine because bottles often break in the cases, and the rum leaks on the conveyor belt, making it sticky. When this happens, the cases then crash into each other, and bottles fall to the ground. This has been happening for a couple of years at McCarty, and it hasn't been fixed. As the operator walks away, cases start coming down the line very quickly, crashing into each other. He hits the emergency stop button. Now, what's supposed to happen next is operators need to put a lock on the machine to prevent somebody from pushing the start button while someone else is inside. Under the machine, there's a lot of shattered glass seen in these photos. There's also another emergency stop button, insofar as you can put underneath the platform to keep it from falling. But employees rarely did this for fear of slowing down production. The man in the orange vest is Dave Davis. He's a temp worker on his first day on any job in his entire life. In fact, his shift started just an hour and a half ago when he sent this photo to his fiance. The operator points down below and tells Davis to sweep up the glass under the machine. Look at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You'll see Davis go underneath the palletizer to sweep up the glass. A few minutes later, Davis goes back upstairs to ask a question. The man in the white shirt, who's a supervisor, told police he had told Davis to sit by the side, but others heard him tell Davis to simply go get some gloves. Davis goes back downstairs underneath the machine. The supervisor and operator finish cleaning the conveyor rollers above Davis. They close the gate and turn on the machine. Cases come down the line, they're pushed into a square, and the platform goes down. Then they hear a yell. They see that Davis has been crushed by the machine. They hit the stop button. The palletizer operator is trying to manually raise the platform off Davis, but it's not working. The supervisor radios for someone to call 911. Here you'll see a worker pass down a pry bar to see if they can lift up the platform. There were some 60 cases weighing about 2,000 pounds on the platform when it went down. First responders got there within minutes, but it was already too late. The weight of the machine had killed Davis.
I'm really hoping you guys could hear that, but you never know with technology. So in short, just give you a little bit of a brief synopsis. Within the first 90 minutes of Dave Davis's first day on the job, he was called over to help a palletizer or help palletize a pallet operator at the Bacardi bottling plant in Florida. And after some miscommunication with that operator, he was found underneath the palletizer when it started up again. And he was crushed and died on the first day of his job. I like to include this video because it really shows that anything can happen at any time, but we can also learn from mistakes and learn to be better from it. I would like to think that this plant, will never have a lockout tagout incident again, or maybe an OSHA violation again, because of just how devastating it can be. I mean, you can imagine how traumatizing this experience was for Dave Davis, as well as his family, as well as the operators and the people in the plant who were working on that day and were trying to help him get out. I mean, they'll never be the same. So I'd like to think that this kind of situation wouldn't happen at this plant again, but we obviously don't want a tragic accident like this to be the only reason why a plant, gets it together. So from incidents like this, again, we learn what we should not do and how we can be better. And here in this example, communication was entirely lacking, not to mention training, which we're not exactly sure if this man even had any training about the control of hazardous energy, but it's definitely something that every employee working in a plant should have some kind of general awareness of lockout, tagout, and really how devastating it can be if it goes wrong. Thankfully, there are OSHA standards and requirements in place that require lockout and tagout training, inspections, and procedures for all machines. And that does save a lot of lives in the long run and has since the standards, became founded, but it does not save every single life. And in 2019, the control of hazardous energy for general industry was the fourth most heavily cited violation. It's a scary statistic because of the severity of the injuries that occur from lockout, tagout accidents. And also another staggering fact is that according to OSHA, proper lockout tagout procedures prevent an estimated 120 fatalities and 50,000 injuries each year. Something interesting to note that there would be, much more fatalities and injuries in place if we didn't have the correct standards in place that OSHA is requiring. I want to talk a little bit about what injuries can occur from machine-related malfunctions, I guess. So machine-related injuries or fatalities can occur during maintenance and servicing tasks when workers are exposed to an uncontrolled release of energy. So without the proper precautions, procedures, personal protective equipment, and training in place, an injury is almost guaranteed to occur at some point. Unfortunately, when it comes to lockout and tagout and working with controlled energy, the injuries just aren't going to be small, minor ones. We're talking about bone fractures, crushing injuries, amputations, and of course, even death could be the end result of not working a lockout, tagout job properly. So just as we saw in the video, these injuries and deaths, they can 100% be prevented if everyone's working together. And we will go over ways to safely work in this space throughout this presentation. So there is an OSHA standard that enforces that employers have a lockout tagout program, or sometimes commonly referred to as an energy control program. So having a lockout tagout program in place ensures that Hollingsworth is able to safely control and isolate energy of any machine that an employee may be working with. The purpose of the program is to ensure that before an employee services equipment where the potential exists for unexpected energization or startup of equipment or the release of stored energy, the machine is isolated from the energy source and cannot be operated further by anyone. I worked with Reed and the safety team to help implement Hollingsworth Lockout Tagout program. and it is required that a written program needs to be in place to be in accordance with OSHA regulations. The OSHA standard that you'll find all this information is 29 CFR 1910.147. It's called the Control of Hazardous Energy. So this is where you'll be able to find every standard related to lockout, tagout, and the subsequent program that is required to be compliant. This standard specifically covers the servicing and maintenance of machines and equipment when an unexpected energization or startup could potentially cause an injury to employees. There are three major components of a lockout tagout program, and that is 1, energy control procedures, 2, training, and 3, periodic inspections, all of which we're going to go over further in this training. And one other important section we want to include is to address some definitions, which I think is really the most important aspect of this whole training for you guys. I want you to get familiarized with all the terms so that it's not foreign to you in case it comes up at some point during your day. You're aware of all the definitions and the hazards. Okay, so in order to ensure that the energy is controlled, a lockout tagout device is used. And a tagout device, they're completely different. So a tagout device is used to indicate and warn potential users that tagged equipment should not be operated. This tag should be securely attached to an energy isolating device, whereas a lockout is placing a device on an energy isolating source in accordance with an established procedure, ensuring that the energy isolating device is locked out. An energy isolating device prevents the transmission and the discharge of energy. For example, a manually operated electrical circuit breaker, disconnect switch, or manually operated switchboard. Those are all examples of an energy isolating device. Energy sources, as you can see here, include electrical, mechanical, hydraulic, pneumatic, chemical, thermal, as well as other less commonly known energy sources. One big topic we want to address here is the difference between affected and authorized employees. So an affected employee is an employee whose job requires him or her to operate or use machinery or equipment on which servicing or maintenance is being performed under lockout tagout procedures. While an authorized employee is a person who is actually locking or tagging out machines in order to perform or service or maintenance, right? So the two terms can be a little bit confusing at first, but just think of it as authorized people are the employees who are just that. They're authorized to do the work. Affected employees are working in the vicinity of the authorized employees, and therefore they're affected by the work being done and need to be trained accordingly. And these are the energy types. So we've got kinetic, potential, thermal, chemical, electrical. I'm just going to briefly go over them just to refamiliarize everyone with the terms. So kinetic energy is formed by mechanical motion. In certain equipment, this motion can lead to other changes, such as change in temperature. Equipment includes pumps, motors, and pressure systems. Potential energy is stored or suppressed energy that presents itself in three forms, whether it be pressure, tension, and gravity. Potential energy is found in machines that have components that are affected by hydraulic pressure, pneumatic pressure, vacuum, tension and springs, and gravity. Thermal energy, it presents when extreme temperature differences exist within a system. The thermal energy can originate from a mechanical, chemical, or electrical source, or from radiation. Chemical energy forms as a result of reactions between different chemicals or changes in the state of a chemical. And chemical energy is found in machines that regulate or are driven by a reaction between substances. And lastly, electrical energy occurs in two forms: alternating current or direct current, or as static electricity. Generated electricity is the most dangerous to workers and is the type of energy most used in offices, factories, and homes. So with that little brief review, we're going to get into the meat of all the lockout and tagout information. Okay, so like we said before in the definitions page, lockout is the placing of a device on an energy isolating device in accordance with an established procedure, ensuring that the energy isolating device is locked out. So what makes lockout procedures so effective? Essentially, employees working inside the hazardous area of a machine are going to be protected by that lock. The only person who can remove the lock is the employee who originally put it on. And now what is a tagout? Tagout is the placement of a tag on an energy isolating device in accordance with an established procedure to indicate that the energy isolating device and the equipment being controlled may not be operated until the tagout device is removed. But tagout procedures are very different than lockout procedures. They're not as effective as lockout procedures because they do not actually control the release of hazardous energy. Tagout procedures do not need to be used if the machine can be locked out. They are an added precaution. The tagout device, you can really just look at it as a piece of paper that is hanging from the energy isolating device that lets employees know of the hazard. If you see the picture here, it says do not operate, equipment is locked out. That's an example of a tag. Okay, so I wanted to go a little bit more into energy sources. So we've got more than one energy source can be utilized on some equipment, and the proper procedures must be followed in order to identify energy sources and then lock out or tag them out accordingly. So the four major energy sources I wanted to cover were electrical, mechanical, hydraulic, and pneumatic. So electrical energy is energy that comes from potential or kinetic energy. An example of an electrical energy is power from a plug outlet. This type of energy source needs to have the power shut off at the machine and also disconnected for it to be completely locked out. Mechanical energy is the energy of an object due to its motion or position. Examples include gravity activation or energy stored in springs. Hydraulic energy pertains to the power related to pressurized fluid used to accomplish machine motion. So a good portion of industrial equipment will have at least one hydraulic energy source, which will obviously need to be locked out. And lastly, I wanted to touch on pneumatic energy. So pneumatic energy refers to the power related to pressurized air. Pressure can be static or in motion, and the majority of industrial machinery will utilize pneumatic energy, and it will have at least one source of pneumatic energy that needs to be locked out. So I previously touched on the different employees and the difference between authorized and affected employees, but there are actually three different types of employees that we want to discuss when referring to lockout, tagout. So we like to include contractor as well when we're talking about the different employees. So like I said before, a person who locks out or tags out machines or equipment in order to perform servicing or maintenance on that machine or equipment is an authorized employee. This employee has gone through the necessary training to control the energy sources of machinery. They're responsible for the placement of the lockout tagout devices and making sure they're in accordance with the lockout tagout program. And then there are affected employees. An affected employee is an employee whose job requires them to operate or use a machine or equipment on which servicing or maintenance is being performed under lockout or tagout. These types of employees may be responsible for working in areas where service or maintenance is being performed, but they're not directly going to be locking or tagging out any devices. They're just working in the vicinity of those employees. And lastly, we want to touch on the contractor. And contractors are non-company personnel who are working in the building. They're likely to be in the area where the work is being performed. So they're non-company workers, but they should have been previously trained in lockout tagout procedures And they should also hopefully be familiar with, the Hollingsworth Company Lockout Tagout program and their policy that's in place. And hopefully, better yet, those contractors they have a good working relationship with the authorized personnel at Hollingsworth, so they can work together to be the best that they can be. Okay, so now we're going to touch on locks. Locks are assigned to authorized employees only, and each lock is then assigned one key. So lockout locks, they'll have a distinct look and can only be used for lockout procedures. This ensures that lockout locks are consistent and that affected employees can easily recognize a lock. It might become confusing, when locks are used for lockout purposes are not being used for lockout purposes and are being used for other activities around the plant. An employee might take the lock there as, maybe some hazardous activities are occurring around that area because they see that distinct lock, but then really nothing hazardous is going on at all. They're actually using the lock for their own purpose. That's what we really want to stay away from. And then tags should also be used with the lock, and this serves as an extra warning of hazardous energy and helps identify who originally placed the lock on the device. Lockout and tagout devices, to be OSHA compliant, they must warn against specific hazards, they must clearly identify the employee that applied the device, and they must be strong enough to resist removal by reasonable force. And they also have a standard color and shape that is determined by Hollingsworth, the employer. In the situation in which the lockout device cannot be attached to the energy isolating device, you'll need to use the tag option instead. So one thing we want to nail down is that a tagout device should be treated the exact same way that a lockout device should be, and employees should become familiar with the Hollingsworth tags and what they look like. The tags need to be kept as close to the machine as possible, and when the tag is attached, the machine should not be tampered with in any way. Again, a tag does not have any restraints on the equipment like a lock does, so it is very important to be aware of your surroundings. Notice the tags because they act as a warning device, and do not go any further in working with the machine. It's good to note also that the tags are not resistant to environmental conditions and should be waterproof if they're outside. If they're not, they don't need to be waterproof, obviously, but just an extra added precaution. If they are also going to come in contact with high concentrations of maybe dust or grease while they're in the facility, new tags may need to be applied more regularly. And so really just to ensure that they're legible for the user. All employees need to be able to read and understand the wording on the tag, not just be able to visibly see it. So this means that if there's more than one language present in your workforce, we want the tag to address every language that is going to be working in the building, especially if they're going to be using the lockout tagout devices. And tags must be attached with non-reusable, self-locking, and non-releasable attachment devices capable of withstanding a minimum of unlocking strength of 50 pounds. The last thing we really want to happen is for them to be accidentally removed during use, or even someone knocks into it and it falls off. That cannot be an option here. That could cause miscommunication and the release of hazardous energy that could potentially cause an injury or death possibly. So when lockout tagout procedures are in use, it typically means that there's some kind of service or maintenance occurring. And servicing and maintenance activities include possibly cleaning, lubricating, clearing jams, and making adjustments when persons may be exposed to the unexpected. So as we discussed with the authorized employees, only trained and authorized workers may place or remove a lockout tagout device on the equipment. wanted to give you guys maybe a real world example. Maybe some of you haven't really had any time to work with Lockout Tagout, or it hasn't come across in your job responsibilities yet, but a real world example of when a Lockout Tagout device would need to be used and procedures must be followed. So lockout is a technique used in all industries, whether it be printing shops, machine shops, welding facilities, etc. You may need to use lockout when a printing press or something like that becomes jammed, and then an employee has to bypass the machine guards in order to reach the area of the jam and clear it out, right? So there is a need to unjam the machine so that it can start up again. But that does not mean that just because this occurred during your normal shift in the middle of a normal production day, it doesn't mean that you are the employee that needs to go right in there and unjam the parts and clear it out. This kind of activity falls under the Lockout Tagout standard because it involves servicing. That could lead to an employee exposure to the unexpected activation of energy. And the same type of thing happens in machine shops every day. If it becomes necessary to perform a adjustment, which requires the employee to bypass a guard again, or place any of his or her part in an area where the work is performed, or maybe in the danger zone, during the machine operating cycle, the Lockout Tagout standard applies as well. So there are times when multiple people are going to be servicing or maintaining a machine together. And this is allowed, but there are certain things that differentiate it from a single person lockout. So when more than one person is involved together, it's called a group lockout. It takes some additional, safe planning when there's multiple people involved. There's going to be a primary authorized employee who will take the majority of the responsibility on and kind of lead the team in the group Lockout Tagout procedures. Each employee who's working alongside that primary authorized employee is going to place their personal Lockout Tagout device on the group lockout mechanism before any work starts. And then once the work is over, you take your own lock and you bring it back with you. Your lock is like an extension of your person almost. It goes with you, it stays with you when you're working. And you can see the OSHA standard where group lockout is referenced is 1910.14722. It just kind of details that specific standard, details when servicing and or maintenance is performed by crew, craft, department, or other group, they shall utilize a procedure which affords the employees a level of protection equivalent to that provided by the implementation of personal lockout or tagout devices. So there needs to be a full program plan in place once, if you're going to do a group lockout. So when you're ready to remove lockout or tagout devices, first you want to inspect the area and make sure that all tools and non-essential items are, not on the ground or going to be in the way of getting into the machine once the machine is, fully operationally intact. Second, you want to ensure that employees have finished their tasks and have moved to a safe location. They're fully out of the way. They're not going to somehow reach into the point of operation at any time once the device is restarted. Third, you're going to then remove your personal lock, personal tagout device. And the last step is to then notify that the equipment is returning to full service. So according to OSHA, a written procedure should be developed, documented, and then used for the control of potentially hazardous energy operations. So an energy control procedure, they're put in place so that employees can follow the steps for shutting down, isolating, and blocking or securing machines or equipment to control hazardous energy. Employers must develop, document, and use specific procedures to control the potentially hazardous energy from coming into place or when employees are servicing equipment or machinery. So this picture is one example of a lockout tagout procedure that was implemented at another client of mine. It's for a battery charger. So the slide shows an energy control procedure for a battery charger for a forklift. You can see the procedure form. It shows the purpose of the procedure, for which is to protect employees from injury when performing servicing or maintenance activities. One of the most important aspects that need to be put in place in the procedure is the voltage. So whether it's electrical, hydraulic, pneumatic, chemical, or mechanical, you need to have the exact voltage of the machine. The procedure also needs to have specific instructions for how authorized employees are to be locking and tagging out the equipment. So to make sure, to make it especially easy to follow, we like to add pictures, as you can see. So you are not, leaving anything up to the imagination. Everything is really strictly depicted, what step A is, what step B is. And lastly, procedures are reviewed annually and what is called a periodic inspection. So we'll go into that here. This is an example of a periodic inspection certificate. The inspection is required to occur annually, and you must be keeping records that the inspection, is occurring on that yearly basis. The purpose of the regular inspection is to identify and notify management if any irregularities or inadequacies within the machine or the energy control procedure were found. You basically run through the energy control procedure and you kind of dictate, following these questions, whether there is any issues. The inspection, using this inspection form, it will identify the machine which the procedure was utilized. So what procedure are we talking about here? You put that right here in this line. The names of the employees included in the inspection and the persons who perform the inspection. The OSHA standard for periodic inspection dictates that the actual inspection must be carried out by an authorized employee who is not a regular user of the procedure. So in this case, the supervisor, maybe all supervisors, have been trained as authorized employees for lockout, tagout. Maybe a supervisor from a different department should be doing the periodic inspection for a specific piece of machinery in a different department. And lastly, I wanted to touch on training. So employers must provide training to ensure that the purpose and function of the energy control program are understood fully by employees and that they have, the general skills and the knowledge required to work with lockout and tagout procedures. Now, this is a general awareness training, so we wanted to make sure that we're going over the purpose and use of the energy control procedures and attempts to restart or re-energize a machine or equipment which are locked or tagged out. I did mention, however, that different categories of employees need a different level of training. So for example, authorized employees need to receive training in the recognition of hazardous energy sources, the types and magnitudes of the energy available in the workplace, and the methods and means necessary for the energy isolation and control. And then affected employees must be instructed in the purpose and the use of the energy control procedures. And then all other employees, which are the awareness level employees who may be in the area where the energy control procedures may be used, they should be instructed about the procedures, about the prohibition relating to attempts to restart the machinery, or equipment which are locked out or tagged out. And that is the type of training that you guys are receiving today. So you have a general awareness now of what needs to be done in terms of locking out devices, tagging out devices, what the difference is, what each employee are responsible for, and also what's involved in a periodic inspection and the energy procedure controls and everything that encompasses that. So this type of platform with the virtual kind of training like this makes it hard for question and answer, but if anything comes up, I wanted to make sure that you guys had a record of my contact information. So you could always shoot me an email, or my phone number is right here. So feel free to reach out with any questions if anything was to come up.